Hello, everyone, and greetings from the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. For those of us who are probably not familiar with CEW, we are an independent non-profit policy research organization based here in Delhi. It's a pleasure to have you all in the session today. We have a pretty long lineup of speakers, various luminaries from different fields who will be sharing their experience today on this very pertinent topic. We all know that energy transition is here. It is happening right in front of us over the coming years as we go through this massive transformation. We're also trying to make sure that how can we make this transition just for one and all. And in that one and all, women are a very, very important part, a critical part of our society. They are certainly more than 50% of our society, and we do need to make sure that this just transition works for everyone. And in that context, it's my pleasure to have you all here in this session. And we'll kick off the session by having a welcome remarks from Ms. Libby Green. Before I hand over to Ms. Libby Green, just a quick introduction. Ms. Green leads the climate and energy vertical at the British High Commission here in New Delhi. Before this, Libby has worn multiple hats over the years, including as deputy head of the mission in the British Embassy in Copenhagen. She was also the head of climate and energy vertical in Beijing under the British High Commission, as well as later the head for health and social care section in the British High Commission there in Beijing. So Libby, I hand it over to you to welcome us all. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Abhishek. So yes, my name is Libby. I head up the climate and energy team here in the British High Commission in Delhi. And in the run up to the International Women's Day next week, I'd like to welcome everyone here to today's webinar on bringing women to the forefront of the energy transition. And I'd also like to thank the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy for their continued support for the UK-India Partnership on Energy. So I thought I'd touch on two things today. One, COP26, because it's still very topical, and I led on that here in the High Commission for the UK. And then secondly, obviously our topic for the day on gender integration in India's clean energy transition. So COP26, I just thought I'd say a few thoughts of what we thought from a UK perspective. Well, first of all, it was, believe it or not, the biggest conference we ever hosted in the UK. So we brought together thousands of delegates from all over the world, including India. So it was a massive logistical challenge and one that we were really pleased that worked out, not least during a global pandemic. So first of all, we were just happy that it happened and that it went well. But in terms of substance, before Paris, the world was on course for 4 degrees of warming by the end of the century, which, as we all know, is horrendous. After Paris, we're heading to 3 degrees. At Glasgow, we've turned the dial down to just under 2 degrees increase, which is obviously still too much. But we think the world is heading in the right direction, and 1.5 degrees is still in sight, is still alive. So in terms of what we achieved, we think we achieved more than we ever thought possible, to be honest, and showed the international process is working. When the UK started its presidency, 30% of the global economy was covered by net zero targets, and now over 90% of the global economy has a net zero target, including India. I'll just mention some highlights before going on to our topic of gender integration. So one of the things that we were really pleased with in the Glasgow Climate Pact is that countries have agreed to come back next year, or sorry, now this year, on their 2030 commitments, if they're not in line with the Paris goal of 1.5 degrees. There was so much more emphasis on adaptation than ever before. We agreed to doubling climate finance for action, adapting to climate change by 2025. For the first time ever, the COP decision had a reference on fossil fuels and coal, which was excellent in terms of where we all need to head. There was more focus than ever on loss and damage, which is a really important topic, which has been, I think, previously not given enough air in COPs. And we finalised all the elements of the Paris rulebook, which was a massive achievement. It's taken us as an international community 6 years to do this, but now that's all done. And finally on COP, India, highlights of COP, PM Modi attending was fantastic. We were really pleased with the ambitious 2030 commitments and the 2070 net zero target that Modi announced. And then more broadly, India was such a important and positive participant at COP, signing up to all of the Glasgow breakthroughs, the Zero Electric Vehicles Declaration, and launching, along with the UK, initiatives to link global green grids and improve climate resilience for small island infrastructure. So we now want to work with the Indian government and the whole of Indian society to put all this in place. So moving on to opportunities for women in the clean energy transition. Over the years, India has successfully created the positive outlook necessary to promote investment in and demand for renewable energy. And I want to congratulate MNRE on recognising this potential and launching the DRE for Livelihoods framework, a huge milestone for the sector, with the potential to boost India's rural economy with clean jobs. In focusing on the last mile, there is a strong business case to be made for women's participation in the sector, not only as consumers, but as entrepreneurs. Studies show that women have a comparative advantage in promoting energy access and enormous potential to create distribution and servicing networks in rural areas. Evidence suggests a high return on investment, financial, social, and environmental outcomes from gender-responsive clean energy solutions. So it's great to see this focus on women reflected across the ministry's DRE guidelines. And in terms of the UK-India partnership on gender, as the Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office, a focus on women and girls is central to everything we do. Our partnership with the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme strengthens resilience to the impacts of climate change and promotes livelihood security amongst poorer women in rural communities in India. Our financial inclusion programs focusing on financial and digital literacy have given 12 million Indian women access to credit to build livelihoods. And projects like the Powered program, which you will hear more about, I think, today, have helped create 4,000 jobs for women and supported over 270 women micro entrepreneurs in the clean energy value chain. I'm also proud to share the UK and Indian network, and over 100 partners have come together as part of a campaign to promote gender equality. By signing the Pledge for Progress, we have committed to amplifying voices of women leaders within organisations and beyond. Most important, the pledge commits us to start with ourselves, review our own practices within our workplace, biases and programs. So to conclude, like tackling climate change, gender equality is a shared global challenge. For the discussion today, I look forward to hearing about the opportunities to bring women to the forefront of the clean energy transition, where I hope we'll focus on solutions, innovations, financing mechanisms, areas for skill building and strengthening enabling policies. So with that, I will conclude my opening remarks by thanking our partners, so Shell Foundation, KPMG, CEW, and Powering Livelihoods for pulling together this webinar. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Libby, for kicking us off and for those excellent remarks to set the stage for the rest of the conversation today. Next, I'm going to invite Adrita. Adrita also comes from UK government FCDO, where she heads the energy and green growth as an analyst. Adrita has more than a decade of experience across multilateral, bilateral, as well as civil society organizations, including UN Women, Selco Foundation, among others. Adrita, may I now invite you to make your brief presentation?
Thanks so much, Abhishek. Can I please request Ankit to display the slides? Thanks. Thank you so much, Ankit. So I'd like to take the opportunity today to just highlight some of the gender and social integration aspects of one of our energy programs, the Power Sector Reform Program. So the Power Sector Reform Program, or the PSR program that we call it for short, is a UK-India bilateral initiative that's aimed at supporting structural market reforms and the integration of renewable energy into the grid. The program began in November 2016 and today has engagement across 3 ministries, 8 central agencies, 9 states, and multiple organizations on the ground. Gender and social inclusion has really been a key focus area for the PSR program. Some of the things we've done is to create a framework to scale up and integrate gender aspects in the energy sector. We've supported the scale-up of women-focused businesses on energy products and services. We've worked on strengthening capacities of women in the energy sector workforce, and we've created livelihood opportunities for women across the energy value chain. So today's presentation, I will try and highlight about 5 of these initiatives and share some of the key learnings from each of them. We'll also be sharing links in the chat to some of the relevant case studies and policy documents that the program has used over the years. If we can just move to the next slide, please. Yeah. So the promotion of women in energy-related enterprises for development, or the POWERED program, is co-funded and implemented by Shell Foundation with a number of downstream partners. Through POWERED, we launched a unique accelerator program that supported female-led ventures across the energy value chain. And what we did through this is we ran grand challenges, boot camps, and provided seed investment to a lot of the enterprises that we worked with. In fact, the picture here, I think, is of our first cohort of women entrepreneurs, one of whom, S4S, will join us on the panel later today. So the impact of this sort of accelerator program has been the creation of about 3,700 jobs for women in the energy value chain. 260 women were supported to set up micro enterprises, and 22 women-led energy startups were supported to scale up. The picture at the bottom right hand is of Taru Naturals. And this is, I think, Ruchi Jain, the founder, who was showcasing some of her agri-linked energy products. So one of the learnings from this accelerator has been that, peer networks and knowledge support are essential for startups to navigate through the early operational stages. So POWERED entrepreneurs really highly valued the close-knit peer community and networking platforms that were created for women stakeholders that were focused on energy clean tech sector. Also, these are very busy people, often running their business as well as having a family life back home. And what we found was that they really benefited from the toolkits that we created on, say, financial modeling, fundraising decks, job descriptions, etc. Moving on to the next example. This is one of the examples that will stay with me throughout my career. This is Project Vahini, promoting women in e-mobility. So essentially what we tried to do here was to promote female ownership of e-rickshaws by addressing the challenges around access to affordable finance, infrastructure, and generating awareness among the community. What we did was to pilot models of women micro-entrepreneurs in last-mile transportation in Uttar Pradesh. So we were successful in doing this with 80 women e-rickshaw drivers and are currently looking to scale the model in other geographies. We also recently wrapped up a 40-day tour of India called Moving Boundaries, which promoted safe transport for women across the country and connected them with livelihood opportunities in the sector. So the picture that you see on the top right-hand corner is of Maria, one of our entrepreneurs that we worked with. The flexibility of being an e-rickshaw entrepreneur has allowed Maria to pursue her graduation in law while also enabling her to be financially independent. We worked with her on driver training, access to low-cost finance, and of course, on convincing her family and community that this was a safe profession for her to enter. One of the learnings, or some of the learnings that we had through the Vahini program was that limited awareness and a lack of infrastructure is a major barrier for the participation of women in the e-mobility sector. Oftentimes, we see that male members continue to play an important role in decision-making. So sensitization and awareness programs need to be targeted at the whole community in order to change mindset. And by having role models like Maria, we were able to do that with a larger group of women. Further, specifically in the e-mobility sector, a lack of documentation for things like loans and driving licenses posed a huge challenge for women drivers. So what really helped us was to have people on the ground, and it also helps to associate with an NGO that can provide that sort of hand-holding support in navigating all the required documentation. Okay, so if we move on to the next example. So this is Powering Livelihoods. Powering Livelihoods is a CEW Will-Grow initiative, which aims to boost India's rural economy by scaling up the penetration of clean energy-powered appliances for livelihoods. Currently, they are focusing on 6 enterprises in the agri and textile sector and working on strengthening the entire ecosystem as well. Specifically, we worked on supporting the adoption of integrated gender lens through the collection of sex disaggregated data, facilitation of gender inclusive investment, gender sensitization training, and making business models more gender inclusive. Learnings, in fact, from the program have fed into MNRE's recently released DRE policy framework that Libby mentioned, with a focus on livelihoods and how the schemes or any programs to come can really target women across the different areas. So in terms of impact for powering livelihoods, they've supported 4,200 women micro-entrepreneurs, and 260 direct jobs have been created for women in the DRE livelihood sector. One of the learnings, which is sort of more of a general learning and not necessarily gender focused, is that DRE enterprises rely majorly on philanthropic investments to generate market evidence for their products. Our learning has been that to commercialize their products, it's really important to leverage private capital, and this requires focused initiatives such as incubation programs, mentorship, access to capital, to funders, that will help create go-to-market strategy, value proposition, marketing plans, etc. Another learning from powering livelihoods that's specific to gender is that we cannot only focus on the enterprise and integrating gender within that enterprise or the solution, but rather to look at the ecosystem as a whole to understand each of the different players, for example, the financing, the policy ecosystem, etc., and ensure that gender is integrated into all of these aspects. Just moving to the next example. So in this example, we are currently integrating gender considerations in the PM Kusum scheme. So PM Kusum, as you'll know, is a flagship Government of India scheme which aims to ensure energy security for farmers through the deployment of solar pumps. So the PSR program is currently working with the Jharkhand Renewable Energy Development Agency, JAREDA, in gender-centric implementation of the scheme. So what we've essentially done here is to facilitate awareness creation camps among women farmers and help sort of handheld them to actually put in applications to access the PM Kusum scheme for solar pumps. The impact that we've seen on the ground so far is that 3,000 solar pump applications have been received from women farmers. We're working very closely with JAREDA to ensure that these are actually taken through to implementation. We'll also be developing a policy brief which has recommendations on mainstreaming gender consideration in wider policy decisions. So what we really learned through this experience is that there's a huge opportunity to dovetail various schemes for greater impact that focus on gender. So for example, organizations like Jharkhand State Livelihood Promotion Society have an immense field presence in the state. They can be included in schemes such as PM Kusum, to enable better mobilization and applications from the farmer community with a focus on women. Further, it's really, really important to simplify processes and ensure that these are digitized so that there is greater participation of women. Typically, what we saw was that women farmers do not have land in their names. And what we had to do with JAREDA is to allow for them to submit affidavits in lieu of land documents. Of course, this is a very complex and time-consuming legal process, so not something that can be easily replicated. So I think simplifying the entire application process and digitizing it will go a long way in encouraging more women to access schemes like the PM. And finally, I'd like to conclude with this last example. This is the Gender and Social Inclusion Framework for Energy Programs. This has really enabled us to develop and implement a lot of the initiatives that I spoke about today. This was one of the early activities that we took up under the program, and it was to really develop a framework to understand what the issues are in the energy sector that can be looked at through a gender lens, and then to design programs that respond to these needs. So essentially what the framework does is it identifies GSI parameters and provides a checklist to assess and ensure GSI integration across various stages of energy programs, whether it's the conceptualization and diagnosis, the implementation stage, or the monitoring and evaluation stage. So in developing this framework and implementing a lot of the GSI initiatives, what we really saw as one of the key sort of challenges in even conceptualizing and designing these initiatives was that there is a lack of gender-focused data. None of the programs, none of the schemes have a budget to actually collect that data, and that data can be critical in identifying what the needs of the sector are, and in also developing indicators and responses to those needs in the sector. We also saw that it was really essential to address the sort of deep-rooted behavioral biases that exist within our society, focused on gender. And this can really be done by engaging communities in dialogues, promoting role models and champions, spreading awareness through compelling mass and social media campaigns, providing incentives for women-led enterprises such as low-cost credit facilities, providing training on unconscious bias, for example, with energy utilities and policymakers, to really sort of integrate all of these things in our day-to-day jobs. So I will conclude with that. I realize it's been a lot of information in a small span of time. Thank you for your time. Do pop any questions that you have in the chat box, and I'll try to get to them. I'll now hand back to Abhishek.
Thank you, Adiza. That was really a packed presentation in terms of insights that you have gathered over the course of these various initiatives. And I must say that this is literally furthering gender inclusion on the ground in various spheres that you have highlighted today. But now to kick us off in terms of the panel discussion that we have lined up for you all, I just wanted to briefly set the stage by sharing a couple of insights and data that we have been gathering as part of our work on gender inclusion in the energy transition. If you look at India in particular, the workforce in India, researchers report that at least 3/4, that is 75% of the full-time farm workers in the country are women, contributing anywhere between 60 to 80% of the food in the country. At least 1/4 of medium, small and micro enterprises in the country are led by women. While women contribute that significantly to our economy, to our food production, we do see a very small representation in the formal employment work sector from the women. Less than 20% women are part of the employment workforce represented in the labor force surveys that we have in the country. And majority of these micro enterprises that women run are actually self-financed. More than almost 80% of them are self-financed, which means that how vulnerable these micro enterprises could be in case of any shocks. And we have seen several shocks in the last 2 years in particular. So certainly we need to do a lot more to create that support ecosystem around the women workforce in the country. And how do we make sure that more and more women move towards better and better livelihood opportunities? And what could be the role of energy in particular in achieving and driving that? And to discuss that, we have a pretty power-packed panel with us coming from different spheres of work. I would now start introducing our panel. Let me first invite and introduce Nidhi Pant. Nidhi has been a co-founder of S4S Technologies, Science for Society Technologies. She has been an entrepreneur throughout and has been leading several initiatives within S4S Technologies. In particular, she has also been awarded Forbes 30 Under 30, both for India as well as in Asia. She has been also awarded by the UNDP as well as Niti Aayog as the, she has been the winner of Women Transforming India Award. So many accolades already under her belt, and we are looking forward to hear more from you, Nidhi. Thank you for joining us today. Next, we have on the panel Ms. Rekha Kulkarni. Rekha ji has been the CEO of Mandeshi Sakhari Bank. It's a bank which is primarily focusing on women with more than 200,000, 2 lakh women having accounts with Mandeshi Bank. As the CEO, she takes care of the overall operations of the bank, but she's also the managing trustee of Mandeshi Foundation. And she has have given several lectures and talks, including at Kennedy School, at Portland University, as well as at Ashoka Foundation. Next, we have in our panel Mr. Deepak Goyal. Deepak heads Shell Foundation's India operation as a regional director. He joined Shell Foundation almost 5 years back and has been focusing on how we can amplify the social impact that the foundation is trying to achieve. Before joining Shell Foundation, Deepak has been part of the Shell group of companies and has served on various roles, including both downstream and upstream operations. Finally, we have Ms. Mahima Sharma. Mahima ji is joining us from the Rajasthan Gramin Ajivika Vikas Parishad, which is the state rural livelihood mission for Rajasthan. She looks after the livelihood training and capacity building in the state-led initiative. And she has been focusing on how the Rajivika's work can transform lives and livelihoods for rural women in Rajasthan. With that, first of all, thank you all for joining us in this session today. Let me kick it off by Nidhi inviting you to share your thoughts. And maybe while you come in, you can spend maybe 30 seconds introducing what S4S does. I'm not sure how many of our audience would be aware of the amazing work that S4S is doing on the ground. But as you come in, what would be really interesting and great to hear from you, that how do you ensure, I mean, you focus on women in a significant way as part of your work. You focus on rural women to provide them livelihoods. So what specifically S4S tries to keep in mind when you're trying to generate more livelihood opportunities for rural women? Over to you.
Thanks, Abhishek, and thanks to the team for the opportunity for sharing our work. S4S stands for Science for Society. It converts farm losses, the B&C cosmetically damaged produce, which doesn't get the right price in the market, to food ingredients. And this is done through intervention of a solar-powered food processing systems, which is operated by the women entrepreneurs. Coming back to your question, how S4S has tried to promote more and more women to join processing is by solving for them. So our technology as well as business model is completely customized, keeping women at the center. We first tried through the Powered program, work with 200 women entrepreneurs to do a small pilot to see if there was a strong business case. Once that was concluded, we try to establish 3 things for all the women entrepreneurs that we work with: that they have asset and finance control, they get the right voice, and they have the right body of work. So they are healthy, they take care of themselves. And while we were doing this, while we try to provide these to the entrepreneurs, we realized that there were multiple challenges that they were facing. For us, the word is equity. So going at their level and solving challenges at their end. And what are these challenges? First is the mobility. Most of these women do not want to travel outside their homes in search of any livelihood options. Second is that they don't have any upfront payment that they can actually make to start any new business, and or they have to borrow from their husband or are dependent on different people to start any new livelihood option. Third is that they need consent of their family, whether it is their husband or their in-laws, to start the work. And the third is that they don't actually feel very confident that they can do it, whether they have the right skill set. So they're always in self-doubt of whether they are the right fit. And fourth would be, I think to some extent, would be some fear of technology, that, you know, what will this equipment do to us? And we try to solve for all of this. We made sure that most of our equipment, our technology is designed in a way where the women doesn't have to feel intimidated by it, and it is also very easy for them to use. They don't have to actually have too many moving parts. So it's just a simple tray where you can actually chop and put the material, and it's easy for them to use. They just have to monitor it throughout the time period. Second is, and the most important was that to have access to these machines, what are the ways in which that can be done? And we realized that these women don't have bank account, they don't, as Adrita very rightly mentioned, they don't have any land holding, no collateral to access finance. Either it goes to the brother or the husband due to patriarchal norms. So they were really challenged in finding access to finance. So solving for that, whether it is through FLDG as an instrument, whether it is through creating small pilots where S4S could guarantee it, and then their loans. So making financing work for them was the most important, and really proud to say that we have actually come down from 25% rate of interest when we started borrowing from NBFCs, made sure that the pilot was successful. There was no default rate, and today we are at 6%, availing support from NABARD as well as the regional rural banks. So in this whole process, had a very good pilot supported by Shell Foundation and FCDO through the POWER program. And the third and the most important part is to actually build the voice of the women. So we realized that the regular training programs were not working. Why is it so? The women actually is really moving towards perfection and is always self-doubting herself. So giving her the right confidence that please start. So taking the initial risk ourselves that, okay, if there are few batches that fail or you don't get the right output, that's okay. So giving them that leeway for first 3 months, putting them on a stipend that, we pay them on per kg on the output that they process. But making sure that the initial pilot is done in a way where the women it feels okay to fail. And the most important thing is that no one has ever asked her for her opinion. So I think that was the most pivotal thing for us when we were asking her for her feedback, that what does she think, what are the challenges. So developing that initial trust through government or through nonprofits that we work with, so that the women can open up and tell us the real challenges, whether it is related to technology, whether it is related to the service that S4S provides in terms of raw material availability, or it is challenges in terms of bank financing. So creating that environment of trust through multiple market forces, through feedback session, through peer-to-peer training. We also saw that individually when we were asking women, it was difficult, but when they were in a group, they were opening up a lot more. So these were a few things which we worked on, and at the end solved for a very strong finance and asset control that women have, giving money directly in their hands, making sure that they have a voice in as a breadwinner of the family, and the last is making sure that their health, that they don't eat last. Like one of the most important thing for us was the food security and the nutrition, access to nutrition. So making sure that the women have access to good food, they understand what nutrition is. So I think these were the 3-4 ways in which we have been able to promote. Still, I think a long way to go for us as well.
Thank you, Nidhi. I think you've highlighted quite a few important challenges as well as nuanced perspectives, which we need to keep in mind, be it the so-called soft aspects or the real hard challenges in terms of financial inclusion. And given that you highlighted financial inclusion in a significant way, I'm now going to turn my attention to Rekha ji. Rekha ji, you have been doing this for decades now. आप लगभग दशकों से कैसे महिलाओं को जोड़ें और उनको फाइनेंशियल इंक्लूजन प्रोवाइड करें, इस पे काम कर रहे हैं. आपके हिसाब से ऐसे क्या चीज़ें हैं जो ध्यान में रखनी बहुत ज़रूरी हैं फाइनेंशियल इंक्लूजन को बढ़ाने के लिए? बैंक में अकाउंट ज़रूर है महिलाओं के अभी, पर कैसे उनको क्रेडिट मिल सके अगर वो कुछ आजीविका किसी तरह से चलाना चाहती हैं? उसके लिए आपका क्या एक्सपीरियंस रहा है? क्या चीजें हैं जो क्रेडिट को अनलॉक कर सकती हैं महिलाओं के लिए?
नमस्ते अभिषेक, थैंक्स फॉर दिस अपॉर्चुनिटी. तो हमारी बैंक स्टार्ट होके करीब 25 साल हो गए. करीब 2 लाख हमारे अकाउंट होल्डर्स है. जैसे कि अभी आपने बताया कि फाइनेंशियल हमारा जो भी मॉडल है, हमारा मानदेशी बैंक है और मानदेशी फाउंडेशन है. जो दोनों साथ मिलके काम करता है। मानदेशी बैंक है वो टोटल फाइनेंशियल एक्टिविटीज देखती है, जैसे सेविंग है, क्रेडिट है, पेंशन है, इंश्योरेंस है। और मानदेशी फाउंडेशन है वो सब लाइवलीहुड के ट्रेनिंग्स है, रेडियो स्टेशन है, ये सब चीजें हैंडल करता है। तो निधि जी ने भी सही कहा कि जो महिलाओं के नाम पे प्रॉपर्टी, एक पहली चीज आती है कि महिलाओं के नाम पे प्रॉपर्टी नहीं होती है, कोलेटरल देने के लिए कुछ भी नहीं होता है। तो पहली चीज हमें वो देखना होता है कि महिलाओं को ट्रेनिंग देके वो खुद कितनी कॉन्फिडेंट है बेनिफिट के लिए, उसको कितना वो इनकम ये कर सकती है। और फिर हमने कैसे किया है, बैंक में करीब 5 लाख तक का हम अनसेक्योर्ड लोन्स देते हैं। तो महिलाओं का अभी 25 साल हो गए, कहीं महिलाएं अभी ऐसी है उसका खुद का घर है, बंगलो है, गाड़ी है, जो 10-10, 20-20 बार उन्होंने लोन लिया हुआ है। तो ऐसे ग्रो होके ये होता है। लेकिन मुझे कहीं ना कहीं यही लगता है कि जो भी हम प्रोडक्ट या कोई भी ये करे, तो उसके लिए सर्विस सेंटर हो, या जैसे अभी किसी की महिला के पास बड़ा लोन लेना है और उसके पास कोलेटरल के कुछ नहीं है, तो जैसे अभी एफएलडी की बात चल रही थी, तो गवर्नमेंट या कोई ऐसे भी होना चाहिए जो गारंटी ले सके इन महिलाओं के लिए। तो ऐसे होने से बहुत सारी महिलाएं, और मुझे यहाँ ये भी बताने के लिए बहुत अच्छा रहेगा कि ये महिलाओं का लोन डिफॉल्ट में भी नहीं जाता है। तो इतनी वो ये रहती है कि उसके ऊपर हम ट्रस्ट करके उसको ग्रो करने के लिए सब जगह से, सिर्फ ऐसा नहीं है कि हम लोन देके उसको छोड़े, उसको उसका मार्केटिंग का सपोर्ट करना है, उसको पैकेजिंग कैसे करना है, उसको कैसे वो कस्टमर के साथ कम्युनिकेट करे, ये सब चीजें हम फाइनेंस के साथ साथ ही उसको ये ट्रेनिंग देंगे तो ये महिलाएं अच्छी तरह से ग्रो होती है। और हमें इसका बहुत अच्छा एक्सपीरियंस है, क्योंकि हमारा अभी ऑनलाइन मार्केटिंग चल रहा है, हमारे एग्जीबिशन लगते हैं, और ये महिलाएं खुद अभी हमारा सिर्फ अभी फाइनेंशियल लिटरेसी नहीं है कि डिजिटल लिटरेसी भी हम ले रहे हैं, क्योंकि अभी टेक्नोलॉजी बढ़ रही है। तो ये महिलाएं ऑनलाइन कैसे मार्केटिंग करे, गूगल पे कैसे करे, उनका खुद का अकाउंटिंग कैसे वो मैनेज करे अपने अपने खुद, ये सब हम अभी सिखा के इन महिलाओं को ग्रो कर रहे हैं। और मुझे कहीं ना कहीं लगता है कि इन महिलाओं के लिए गारंटी फंड का कुछ होने की गवर्नमेंट की तरफ या किसी की तरफ से जरूरत है।
Thank you, Rekha ji. Clearly, a lot of interesting examples in terms of how success have come through sustained support to women in terms of financial inclusion, with some women having their own bungalows, cars, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
But clearly, one thing that you highlighted is the need for some kind of guarantee mechanism, which can act as a safety net for financiers, while you also highlighted that the default rate itself remains very, very low when it comes to giving credit to women. But you did mention a very important point, which is the 360-degree support that is required beyond the financing in order to make sure that these small livelihoods that women are running, operating, and leading become successful. And that sort of very nicely ties into my next question to Mahima ji. Because Rajivika, much like various other state rural livelihood missions, have been looking at that 360-degree kind of support. तो महिमा जी, आपसे ये जानना चाहेंगे कि राजीविका के एक्सपीरियंस में किस तरह से वुमेन लेड लाइवलीहुड्स को सपोर्ट करने के लिए क्या क्या आपने किया है, और उसमें से मुख्य लर्निंग्स क्या है, ऐसे क्या लेसन्स हैं जो बाकी ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस जो वुमेन को सपोर्ट करना चाहते हैं इन द एनर्जी ट्रांजिशन, इन द लाइवलीहुड ट्रांजिशन, क्या वो सीख सकते हैं राजीविका के एक्सपीरियंस से? महिमा जी, आप म्यूट पे हैं, आप अनम्यूट कर लीजिए।
आप सभी को नमस्ते। आप सभी का थैंक यू कि आपने मुझे ये प्लेटफॉर्म दिया मेरा एक्सपीरियंस शेयर करने के लिए। सबसे पहले मैं अपना इंट्रोडक्शन से स्टार्ट करती हूँ। मैं महिमा शर्मा, प्रोजेक्ट मैनेजर, वर्किंग एज ए प्रोजेक्ट मैनेजर लाइवलीहुड। मैं 5 साल से इस ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के साथ जुड़ी हूँ। पहले मैं जिला स्तर पे काम करती थी, और फिर उसके बाद मैं 2 साल से यहाँ पे जयपुर हेडक्वार्टर पे काम कर रही हूँ एज ए प्रोजेक्ट मैनेजर। हम लोग जो राजस्थान ग्रामीण आजीविका विकास परिषद है वो SRLM जिसे हम बोलते हैं, स्टेट रूरल लाइवलीहुड मिशन, ये बेसिकली इसका जो अल्टीमेट विजन है वो लाइवलीहुड ही है, क्योंकि हम जो SHG जो हमारा सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप है उसको हम उसका फॉर्मेशन करके उसको फाइनेंशियल सपोर्ट देकर जो हम जो उसको अल्टीमेट जो हम उसका ऑब्जेक्टिव है वो हमारा लाइवलीहुड ही है। तो उस हमारा जो ऑर्गेनाइजेशन का मेन ऑब्जेक्टिव वुमेन एम्पावरमेंट, पॉवर्टी रिडक्शन, सस्टेनेबल लाइवलीहुड, जेंडर इक्वेलिटी और अलोंग विद फाइनेंशियल लिटरेसी, जैसा कि रेखा मैम ने भी अभी हमको शेयर किया था। तो अभी हमने जो है सबसे पहले जो हम SHG फॉर्मेशन हम जो लोग करते हैं उसमें हमने राजस्थान का ऑलमोस्ट 80% पार्ट जो है हमने कवर कर लिया है। SHG फॉर्मेशन से हमने 80% जो है हमारा सेक डेटा को जो है हमने मोबिलाइज कर लिया है। उसके बाद में हम लोग उन लोगों को कुछ स्टार्टअप फंड देते हैं, कुछ 15,000 समथिंग। उसके बाद हम लोग उनको 75,000 का CIF देते हैं, जिसको कि हम कम्युनिटी इन्वेस्टमेंट फंड बोलते हैं। और इसमें सबसे बड़ा हर्ष का विषय यह है कि हमने जो एनालिसिस किया है उसमें से 70% जो महिलाएं हैं वो अपना जो CIF का जो पैसा है वो उसको लाइवलीहुड जनरेशन में काम में ले रही है, जो हमारा एक बहुत बड़ा अचीवमेंट है। क्योंकि हम लोग जब ये SHG फॉर्मेशन का काम करते हैं तो हम लोग उनको ये लर्निंग देने का कोशिश करते हैं कि अगर आप जो आपका नहीं अगर आप इसको करती हैं तो आप लोगों के पास कोई इसका इंटरेस्ट चुकाने का या जो आपका जो पैसा है चुकाने का आपके पास कोई सोर्स नहीं बचेगा। तो उसी से प्रभावित होकर महिलाएं जो है हमारी ज्यादा से ज्यादा कम्युनिटी इन्वेस्टमेंट फंड का यूज कर रही हैं। उसके अलावा हम लोग क्रेडिट लिंकेजेस भी करवाते हैं। पहले हम सिर्फ नेशनलाइज्ड बैंक पर ही काम कर रहे थे, लेकिन उसके बाद में हम लोग ICICI फाउंडेशन और हमारा HDFC, हम इन बैंक्स पे भी जा रहे हैं जो कि हमें काफी सपोर्ट कर रही हैं। और जो महिलाएं जो एंटरप्रेन्योरशिप से जुड़ना चाहती हैं, जिनके लिए सिर्फ कम्युनिटी इन्वेस्टमेंट फंड सफिशिएंट नहीं होता है, वो ये लोन लेकर बहुत सारी एक्टिविटीज कर रही हैं। अब जब हम बात करते हैं लाइवलीहुड की, तो लाइवलीहुड में हमारे पास 2 कैटेगरीज हैं जिसमें हम काम कर रहे हैं। एक जिसको हम बोल सकते हैं फार्म लाइवलीहुड, जिसमें हम एग्रीकल्चर और लाइव स्टॉक को काउंट करते हैं, और एक हमारा नॉन लाइवलीहुड एक्टिविटीज है जिसमें हम बहुत सारा फॉर एग्जांपल हमारा किराना शॉप हुआ, सम अदर शॉप्स हुई जो महिलाएं कर रही है। तो हमारा जो फार्म लाइवलीहुड करें एग्रीकल्चर की, तो एग्रीकल्चर में हम पिछले 5 साल से काम कर रहे हैं, जिसमें हम विलेज लेवल पे एक कैडर हम लोग डेवलप करते हैं, जिनको हम कुछ सखी का नाम देते हैं, जिसको कृषि सखी, पशु सखी। हम उन लोगों को 15 या 20 दिन का ट्रेनिंग देते हैं इन द एंटायर ईयर। वो लोग ये अवेयरनेस का प्रोग्राम करती हैं कि किस तरह से हमको टेक्निक यूज करनी है हमारे प्रोडक्शन के टाइम पे, क्या कैसे हम प्रोडक्शन एनहेंसमेंट कर सकते हैं, किन किन बातों का हमको ध्यान रखना है। ये चीज का वो कैंपेन कर रही हैं पिछले 5 साल से। इसी तरह से सिमिलरली पशु सखी का हम देखें तो बहुत सारे राजस्थान के रीजन्स में हम लोग बहुत सारे तरह के कैटल्स जो हैं लोग रखते हैं। जिस तरह से हम गॉट मान लीजिए, आपका पोल्ट्री हो गया, बहुत लोग करते हैं। तो वो लोग वैक्सीनेशन कब करवाना है, आपका डीवर्मिंग क्यों करना है, आपका कास्ट्रेशन से आपको क्या फायदा है, ये सारी चीजें ये अवेयरनेस उनको देती हैं, ताकि हम प्रोडक्शन एनहांसमेंट, ब्रीड इम्प्रूवमेंट पे हम लोग आगे जा सके। ये हम लोग काम कर रहे हैं। इसके बाद जो हमारा एडवांस जो हमारा जो प्रोजेक्ट है NRTP, जिसके अंदर मैं पूरा लीड कर रही हूँ, नेशनल रूरल इकोनॉमिक ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन प्रोजेक्ट, जिसमें कि हम लोग प्रोडक्शन एनहांसमेंट के आगे में काम कर रहे हैं, जिसमें हम लोग सिर्फ प्रोडक्शन एनहांसमेंट पे ना काम करके हम लोग वैल्यू चेन और मार्केट लिंकेजेस पे भी काम कर रहे हैं। जिसमें अगर हम एग्रीकल्चर में अगर हम बात करते हैं तो हमारा जो भी एग्री कमोडिटी है, ना केवल उनको अच्छे दाम पे सेल करवाना, बल्कि उनको वैल्यू एडिशन करके, प्रोसेसिंग करके, और जो हमारा हाउस होल्ड है, हमारा जो परिवार है, उनको फायदा दिलवाना। इसी तरह से हम लोग लाइफ स्टॉक में बात करें तो हम लोग बक सेलिंग, पोल्ट्री, हैचरी एस्टेब्लिशमेंट, इन सब पे काम कर रहे हैं, जिससे कि हम लोग पहले हम लोग बाहर से चिक्स परचेज करके यहीं पे हम लोग पोल्ट्री करवाते थे, लेकिन अभी हमारा जो नया इनिशिएटिव है कि हम लोग हैचरी खुद एस्टेब्लिश कर रहे हैं, हमारे 2 डिस्ट्रिक्ट्स हैं उसमें। इसके अलावा हम लोग एक यूनिक एक्टिविटी है हमारी, अजोला कल्टीवेशन। आप सभी लोगों ने अगर नाम सुना हो तो, अजोला एक ग्रास टाइप जो है वो सिर्फ पानी में कल्टीवेट होता है। उसको हम जो हमारे पशु होते हैं उसको खिलाने से उसमें हाईएस्ट प्रोटीन कंटेंट होता है, जिसको खिलाने से उसका जो मिल्क प्रोडक्शन है वो बढ़ता है, उसका हेल्थ इंप्रूवमेंट होता है। तो हमारा जो टारगेट था कि हम राजस्थान के हर जो हमारे लाइवलीहुड करने वाले हाउस होल्ड हैं, हम उसमें अजोला करवाएं, और हम अभी तक हमारे अचीवमेंट में हम लगभग 90% हाउस होल्ड में अजोला कल्टीवेशन करवा रहे हैं। और ना हम अजोला कल्टीवेशन करवा रहे हैं, बल्कि हमारा जो अजोला है वो हम बाहर भी दूसरे डिस्ट्रिक्ट्स में भी सेल कर रहे हैं, जिससे भी महिलाओं को इनकम जनरेशन हो रहा है। और हमारा प्लान है कि हम हर हाउस होल्ड में इतना अजोला हम करवा सके ताकि हर महिला को उससे जो है इनकम हो। उसके बाद में अगर हम बात करें नॉन फार्म की, तो नॉन फार्म एक्टिविटीज में हम हर डिस्ट्रिक्ट में हमने एक दीदीज कैंटीन का जो है प्लान लिया है, जिसमें हमारे 5 डिस्ट्रिक्ट जो हैं दीदीज कैंटीन, दीदीज थाली के नाम से कर रहे हैं। उसमें हम लोगों का जो ये दीदीज थाली है, ये कलेक्टेड जो डिस्ट्रिक्ट कलेक्टेड ऑफिस होता है उसमें वहाँ ये एस्टेब्लिश करवाया है। इसमें कुछ CSR फंड सपोर्ट भी है, कुछ हमने प्रोजेक्ट फंड सपोर्ट से भी ये किया है। और यहाँ पे जितने भी ऑफिसेस में जितने भी ब्रेकफास्ट, जितना भी टी सप्लाई होता है, ये इसी कैंटीन से होता है। और इसमें जो वर्कर जो काम करती है वो ये महिलाएं ही काम करती है। तो ये भी हमारा एक इनकम जनरेशन एक्टिविटी का एक पार्ट है। और दूसरा एक जो नया इनिशिएटिव जो पिछले 2 साल से हम काम कर रहे हैं, राजस्थान के उदयपुर जिले में हम लोग हर्बल गुलाल का काम कर रहे हैं। आप लोगों ने अगर सुना हो तो ये हर्बल गुलाल दिल्ली सरस मेला तक भी गया था, और इसका बहुत डिमांड है। पिछले 2 साल से महिलाओं ने इसमें काफी इनकम जनरेशन किया है। जो उदयपुर रीजन में जो पलाश का फूल होता है उससे ये हर्बल गुलाल बनता है। तो ये यूनिक एक्टिविटी भी हमारी महिलाएं कर रही है। उसके बाद हमारे जितने भी प्रोडक्ट्स हैं, 1 ब्लॉक 1 प्रोडक्ट का कंसेप्ट हमने लिया है पिछले साल में। उसमें हमारा जो है टारगेट ये है कि हर ब्लॉक का हर प्रोडक्ट जो है हम लोग निकाल के, और उसको हमारा जो मार्ट डिस्ट्रिक्ट मार्ट है या स्टेट लेवल मार्ट है वहां पे लाके उसका मार्केटिंग करने का हम लोगों का प्लान है। उसके बाद में जितने भी हमारे प्रोडक्ट्स हैं उसके लिए हमने अपने राजीविका की ब्रांड एम्बेसडर रेस्पेक्टेड मिसेस रूमा देवी को हमने बनाया है। हैव यू हर्ड अबाउट इट? कि वो हमारी जो है जोधपुर से बिलोंग करती हैं और वो राजीविका की ब्रांड एम्बेसडर भी हैं। उसके बाद
थैंक
में
यू महिमा जी, आपको मैं 1 मिनट रुकूंगा, अब आपके पास में दोबारा आता हूँ इन 5-7 मिनट्स, पर आपने ऑलरेडी इतना कुछ बता दिया है जो आई वांट ऑल ऑफ अस टू एसिमुलेट एंड टेक लेसन्स एंड लर्निंग्स फ्रॉम इट। जैसे जो SRLMs हैं एंड NRLM है, these are already aggregating women across the country. We have 67 million rural women who are part of the SHG network, probably one of the biggest such network anywhere across the world. And clearly there are a lot of lessons that energy stakeholders can learn from the NRLM and SRLM in the country. So thank you for sharing a whole lot of that. Now I'm going to move towards Deepak. Deepak, Shell Foundation has been focusing on gender inclusion in energy space for quite some time. And there have been several initiatives that the foundation has started. Some of those we also heard, which are in partnership with UK FCDO. From your experience of looking at some of these initiatives, what do you think has worked and what more needs to happen?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Abhishek. I think quite a bit have been already said by Nidhi, Rekha, and others, and Adrita explained quite a bit on our learning so far on Powered. So probably I would not repeat that. right? But I think so. If I have to really drill down into 3 or 4 specific points on where we think more efforts are required for just transition or inclusion of gender, right? Number one will be the product and services design, where we think a lot more work is required. So women operate at low levels of productivity and high levels of drudgery, especially in rural areas, mainly because of the lack of access to fit for purpose products, right? Men has a better access to machines and products than women. And one of the classic example is mobility. They are dependent on their male counterparts for anything and everything when they have to travel, right? Now, while it might not look like a big issue, when we talk with entrepreneurs, it came out as a biggest issue, right? Because if they need anything, they need to depend on them. Unfortunately, what happens is not all enterprises, design their products to be woman friendly to start with. But once they start doing pilots, then design changes are made, and it's more of an afterthought, which means that products are not really optimal, right? So one thing that needs to happen, we need to have more concentrated efforts on ensuring woman-friendly products and also services like reliable and locally available after-sale services. This is one of the biggest market gap when it comes to women owning asset. What would happen if asset will not work? That's one of the key questions, right? Again, as I said, mobility is a big constraint. While men can go to the urban area service station, get it repaired, it's a bit more less flexible for women on that. So how do we do that? How do we make sure that the products are flexible to use? They can use at the different times of the day, right? I think so. If we can have more women-centric design thinking when we look at the new products, productive use assets, DRE products, right? I think that would significantly improve the quality and uptake of these products by women, right? That's one key element. The second key element is improving end user financing. We need more of Rekhaji and more of Mandeshi banks. Honestly, in our country, we have very, very few such banks like Mandeshi banks who can provide such loans, right? And let's understand why, right? And it's not just about collaterals, it's also about culture, it's also about processes. If I give you example, so majority of women entrepreneurs in the sector, they're first time entrepreneurs, right? Majority of them. And they find it very challenging to access the finance due to either lack of networks that they have or they don't know the procedures, right? If we speak with some women entrepreneurs, they will not have a credit history. Bankers will insist on spouses or other male members to become co-borrowers, right? Or bankers will not give loans to unmarried women because there's a perceived threat that after marriage they might not be at the same location and the chance of default goes up, right? So the number of women that are eligible with the current underwriting processes and the current processes becomes too fewer. Either they need a co-borrower, husband, or they need to be married. These are not the constraints that men face. These are constraints that applies to a woman on that. And as Rekhaji mentioned, the evidence is that women have lower NPAs than men. And it's a data now speaking. Still, we have not managed to change our thinking. We have not managed to change our processes, right? We also need to look at new modern underwriting processes. Like, for example, psychometric analysis, where lenders can make predictions about borrowers' willingness to pay, right? One element is capacity to pay. If you're talking about productive use asset, there we can assess capacity to pay. The second element is willingness to pay, right? Where we can use like a psychometric thing. We're just trying that with one of our other partner companies, Refin, with e-rickshaws. It's gender agnostic pilot we are doing for e-rickshaws. And so far the outcome has been very, very positive. Using psychometric, the NPAs have been less than 1%, right? So we need to think more about that, right? And other more important stuff, what we have seen is that women are more comfortable in talking about loans with a woman in a bank, right? So financiers across the board, they also need to look at gender ratio in their branches. We need to look at women in sales, women in collections, right? We need to improve gender inclusion even at the banking sector so that they can reach out to more women and they can understand their challenges, or they can be more friendly in talking to them, right? So there's this quite a bit that can be done on financing element, right? But I'm saying that it's much more than asset. It's more about cultural, it's more about our thinking, it's more about banking itself. The third really is policies, right? Quite a bit has been said on the data front, which I completely agree, right? There's a lack of gender data, disagreed data on scheme beneficiaries. The number of government schemes, number of them, right? But there's a lack of data, which makes it very challenging to understand the proportion of women beneficiaries and the challenges in implementation, right? While there are schemes, there's no effective data to measure them, right? We need additional efforts now to understand how spending by government, by foundations, concessional capital, how spending translates into gender-based outcome, right? We need more such data on that. And also, I think we need efforts on capacity building of policymakers and implementers. It's not that they're not willing to do it. It's just that they don't know about these things, right? So I think some more efforts are required on capacity building, and probably the closer engagement with organizations who are working with women on designing these schemes might be like a good first starting point on this capacity building. But I think with all these things, we've already made a huge progress. Let me be very honest, right? In the last 10 or 20 years, we've made huge progress. Still, work needs to be done. But few structural changes, few cultural changes, I think we can accelerate the pace at which we're making the progress. It's not about just making the progress, it's also about making the progress quickly. We can't take now 10 years of what we did in last 10 years. We need to do that in 3 years. So what do we do? What do we change to achieve the same outcome that we achieved in 10 years, now in 3 years? That's the question mark, right? The question is not that do we know what to change? The question is, can we change that quickly?
Thank you, Deepak. I mean, you started off by saying like much has been already said, but still you added a lot of additional important inputs to the discussion. I loved really learning a lot of those things that you shared with us. You did highlight and talked about the policy, and maybe that's the next thing that I'm going to pick on and going to call upon Nidhi once again. We all know, and Libby also started us off by, in her remarks, mentioning about this DRE policy framework that has been recently released by Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, Government of India, which is aiming to mainstream these clean energy-based livelihood solutions. And to our mind, this is one of the few policy frameworks or policies by the Government of India which calls out for gender inclusion in very specific way. Which talks about, at least in intent, that they want to further gender inclusion as well as inclusion for marginalized communities as they roll out the implementation of the policy. So Nidhi, given that this policy probably directly speaks to entrepreneurs like you who are already trying to do clean energy-based livelihood solutions, what do you think it would take to really scale up the operations of the sector, the impact of the sector from where it is today to 100x, and do that fast, as Deepak said, and not wait for another 10 years by the time we reach that 100x? What do you think needs to happen more and beyond?
Thanks, Abhishek. Definitely the policy is first step. But I think one thing that actually is needed is simplification. How do we translate this in marketing or call for action? First is, how is it going to be distributed? So how will that women come to know that there is something like this? So accessibility becomes very important for her to get this knowledge, and for this to be done at scale. How does that work? Say something like an FPO, you have a CBBO, which is a central body who's, for them it's important, and their role is to get this information out to everyone, all the farmers. So in the same way, if ministry can really deploy on a standard framework through which the information is distributed across the beneficiaries, it would be important. Second, I think, is definitely simplification of what is being offered. So so the beneficiary really knows that what are they signing up for. So just giving you a small example is that rather than having like a call, this is just a suggestion, like having a call for action for, say, solar water pumps, but what does that do and why, what is the role of women, and changing like the marketing a bit, where instead of a male farmer you have a female farmer doing it, so small, so that people can relate to it. So first would be simplification of the framework, what is it actually having as an impact, and third is translating all of this in a more systematic manner, so which is relatable for women also, when they see it, that this is something that they can do and not be intimidated by just looking at these posters. So I think that's something which is very important.
Great. Thank you, Nidhi. Now that we are on this topic of clean technologies, climate resilient technologies, which can further livelihood opportunities and incomes for women and also for rural population in general. Rekha ji, I wanted to understand from you, as a banker, आप इन टेक्नोलॉजीज को कैसे देखते हैं? When you are sanctioning a loan, जब आप एक लोन सैंक्शन कर रहे हैं, इवैल्यूएशन कर रहे हैं, मान लीजिए एक ग्रुप ऑफ वुमन या फिर एक वुमन wants to take up a food processor, उनके पास कोई फल या सब्जी वो उगा रहे हैं जिसको वो प्रोसेस करके कुछ उसका कैंडीज बनाना चाह रहे हैं, जूसेस बनाना चाह रहे हैं, स्क्वैशेस बनाना चाह रहे हैं, अगर वो टेक्नोलॉजी ग्रीन है या फिर वो क्लाइमेट रेजिलिएंट है, तो हाउ डज आपका बैंक लुक्स एट दैट टेक्नोलॉजी एंड किस तरह से इट चेंजेस योर डिसीजन मेकिंग टुवर्ड्स सैंक्शनिंग दैट लोन? इफ यू कैन हेल्प अस अंडरस्टैंड फ्रॉम योर ओन पर्सपेक्टिव एज अ बैंकर, दैट वुड बी ग्रेट.
तो मेरा पहले मैं यहाँ थोड़ा ये करूंगी कि जैसे आपने बताया कि ऐसे लोन सैंक्शन करते वक्त बैंकर क्या देखना चाहेंगे. तो एक तो है कि हम बहुत रूरल एरिया में हमारी बैंक की ब्रांचेस है, तो जो भी मशीन्स ले रही है तो महिलाओं को जो भी यदि कुछ हो गया तो वहां पे सर्विस सेंटर्स है क्या, क्योंकि मशीन है, उन्होंने लिया है, उनके पास सब कुछ करने की कैपेसिटी है, लेकिन ऐसे वक्त उनको कुछ कैपेसिटी, ऐसे सर्विस, कुछ मशीन खराब हो गई और सर्विस अच्छी तरह से नहीं मिला, तो वो महिला क्या, उसका तो बिजनेस बंद हो जाएगा. तो हम देखते हैं कि क्योंकि हमने ऑलरेडी ऐसे बहुत सारे वक्त हमने ट्राई किया था. मैं इसका ही यहाँ एक एग्जांपल देना चाहूंगी कि हमने सोलर का एक प्रोडक्ट डिजाइन किया था और सोलर के पैनल बहुत महिलाओं ने लिया, लेकिन बाद में उनको सर्विस नहीं मिली. तो एक उस ऐसे टाइप के हम प्रोडक्ट डिजाइन करें और उनको सर्विस टाइम पे नहीं मिली तो हमारे रिकवरी के ऊपर इफेक्ट हो जाता है. तो वो चीजें पहले सब हमें देखना पड़ता है. और जैसे हमारी महिला बैंक है तो हमने कुछ हमारे पॉलिसीज में ऐसे डिसीजन लिया हुआ है. हमने पोल्ट्री को लोन नहीं देते हैं, लेकिन चिकन्स को देते हैं, क्योंकि उसका पहला डायरेक्टली पैसा वो महिला के हाथ में आता है. हम डेयरी को लोन नहीं देते हैं, लेकिन बफेलो काउ को सिंगल रहता है और उसका जो भी पेमेंट आता है वो महिला के आता है, उसको देते हैं. गोट फार्म को नहीं देते हैं, लेकिन 2-3 गोट लेना है उसके घर पे तो उसको देते हैं. ऐसे थोड़े से हमने पॉलिसीज बना के रखी है. और जैसे नीड बेस का अभी बात चल रही है तो वहां में एक हमारा प्रोडक्ट का, यदि टाइम आपका परमिट करता है तो मैं बोलना चाहूंगी. है अभिषेक टाइम थोड़ा सा?
जी प्लीज रेखा जी, प्लीज कंटिन्यू. तो
हम ना एक 2012 में हमारे 300 महिला जो वीकली वेंडर्स मार्केट में बैठते थे, उनका सुबह और शाम को डायरी लिखते थे. हाँ, उनका कैश फ्लो, इनफ्लो क्या है और आउटफ्लो क्या है. तो और इसको सब GIZ और नाबार्ड हेल्प कर रही थी इस प्रोजेक्ट को. तो इस 6 महीने के बाद इसका ऐसे हमें अलग अलग इनपुट सामने आए कि ज्यादातर उस महिला स्ट्रीट वेंडर का, वेजिटेबल वेंडर्स का पैसा सुबह वो साहूकार से 1000 रुपए लेती है और शाम को 1000 रुपए, 50 रुपए या 100 रुपए उसके ऊपर वो इंटरेस्ट देती है पर डे के लिए. तो हमने देखा कि ऐसे ये महिलाएं क्यों कर रही है, तो उससे हमें सामने आया कि इस टाइप की हम उसका नीड देके लोन प्रोडक्ट यदि हम डिजाइन करें तो वो महिलाओं को काफी है, उसको बैंक में नहीं आना है, उसका डे ये होता है क्योंकि बैंक 10 बजे खोलेगी, तो उसका डे उसको खराब नहीं करना है। बैंक के लोन पेपर्स डॉक्यूमेंट साइन करने के लिए 2-3 बार, बैंक ऐसा नहीं कि एक बार आया और लोन सैंक्शन हो गया, उसमें उसको टाइम नहीं देना है। और हमने ये भी देखा कि वो सुबह देते हैं और शाम को वापिस करते हैं, तो उसका 100% रिकवरी भी है वहां पे। और वो उसको कुछ पेपर्स नहीं देना है, मनी लेंडर को कुछ नहीं है, तो उसको इस टाइप के लोन प्रोडक्ट्स चाहिए थे। तो हमने 2014 में ऐसे एक लोन प्रोडक्ट स्टार्ट किया, जो हमारे स्टाफ सुबह जाके उस महिलाओं को पैसे देते हैं और शाम को कलेक्ट करते हैं। करीब हम 35 वीकली मार्केट्स में ये अभी काम कर रहे हैं और इसका बहुत अच्छा रिजल्ट है। और बहुत सारे इंस्टीट्यूट, बहुत सारे आरबीआई हो, ये बहुत सारे फाइनेंशियल ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है, ये प्रोडक्ट के लिए देखने आते हैं। इसके ऊपर हमारा इम्पैक्ट असेसमेंट भी आफ्टर 2 साल हुआ, तो वो महिलाएं पहले सिर्फ ओनियन पोटैटो रखती थी, अभी उसकी 3-4 सब्जियां और भी बढ़ गई है, उसके पास पैसा है तो उसके पास बार्गेनिंग कैपेसिटी आ गई है, तो उसको आगे से पैसे जो अभी ले रही है वो कम दाम में भी उसको मिल रहा है, क्योंकि उसके हाथ में पैसा है, ज्यादा पैसा है, करीब 40,000 तक का हम उसको सीसी सैंक्शन करके रखा है। तो ये अलग अलग चीजें देखने को आई। तो वैसे ही है, जो भी हम प्रोडक्ट या कुछ भी बनाएंगे तो वो क्या नीड है, कस्टमर की क्या नीड है और उस एरिया में क्या चलता है। अभी नम्रता ने बताया था ना कि हम अलग अलग ब्लॉक के एक प्रोडक्ट हम देखते हैं, तो अभी हमारा मसवड़ में भी ब्रांच है और पुणे में भी है, दोनों को हम एक ही प्रोडक्ट डिजाइन करेंगे तो वो नहीं है, यूज होता है। तो हमारे मसवड़ ब्रांच के लिए अलग प्रोडक्ट, कस्टमर की नीड अलग है, यहाँ 20,000 तक चलता है, वही हमारा पुणे में 1 लाख तक का होना चाहिए, क्योंकि वहाँ का बिजनेस बढ़ाइए। ये सब चीजें हैं जो बहुत सारा कस्टमर के नीड बेस पे यदि हम थोड़ा फ्लेक्सिबल रहेंगे तो बहुत अच्छी तरह से प्रोडक्ट भी वर्कआउट हो सकते हैं और सर्विस भी दे सकते हैं।
Thank you, Rekha ji. I think both Deepak and you have highlighted clearly the need for after-sale services, which really jumps out here. And I'm hoping that the entrepreneurs who are listening to the session are taking a note of this. Given that we were discussing that how we enable more and more technology adoption, महिमा जी, आपसे मैं जानना चाहूँगा कि राजीविका के एक्सपीरियंस में कुछ ऐसे अगर एग्जांपल्स हैं जहाँ पे किसी तरह की प्रोसेसिंग टेक्नोलॉजी महिलाओं ने इस्तेमाल करना शुरू किया, जिससे उनकी आमदनी और आजीविका बढ़ी, या कुछ किसी भी तरह का पोस्ट हार्वेस्टिंग प्रोसेसिंग हो रहा है या वैल्यू एडिशन कुछ वो कर रहे हैं, उसमें टेक्नोलॉजी अडॉप्शन के साथ क्या चैलेंजेस आए या फिर उनको कैसे ओवरकम किया, उसके संदर्भ में अगर आप हमें कुछ अपने एक्सपीरियंसेस शेयर कर सकें, दैट विल बी वेरी हेल्पफुल।
जैसे कि आपका जो क्वेश्चन था उसी के क्रॉस में जाना चाहूंगी। जो आपका क्वेश्चन था कि हार्वेस्टिंग के बाद प्रोसेसिंग पे क्या काम हुआ और उसमें क्या चैलेंजेस आए। तो इसमें 2 चीजें हैं। जैसे भी हम किसी भी चीज का प्रोसेसिंग पे जाते हैं तो स्टार्टिंग में जो हमने देखा कि हम जो है मैन्युअली मशीनरी को ही हम अप्रोच कर पाए, चाहे आप उसको फंड का स्कैरिसिटी मान लीजिए या लैक ऑफ अवेयरनेस मान लीजिए। तो ऐसे केसेस में जब हम कुछ मैन्युअली जब हम करने जाते हैं, मशीनरी होता है लेकिन उसमें काफी कुछ पार्ट जो है मैन्युअली ही होता है, तो उसमें बहुत सारा जो है हम मैन पावर भी हमको लगाना पड़ता है, महिलाओं को लगाना पड़ता है। उसके साथ में जो हमारा जो पर डे का आउटकम है वो एक्सपेक्टेड आउटकम नहीं होता है, और जो इन्वॉल्वमेंट होता है महिलाओं का जो जहाँ होना चाहिए वहां ना होके, मतलब हम लोगों को उनको एंगेज करके रखना पड़ता है। प्लस बहुत सारी महिलाएं जो है नरेगा में भी काम करती हैं हमारी जो है, तो वो वहाँ हमारे साथ चैलेंजेस ये भी आता है कि वो वहाँ पे जितना उनको मजदूरी मिलता है हम उसको compete कर पाते हैं कि नहीं कर पाते हैं, क्योंकि राजीविका जो कोई भी प्रोजेक्ट लेके आता है या जो कोई भी सेटअप लेके आता है, इनिशियली उसको यही चैलेंजेस का देखना पड़ता है कि हम अगर उसको पर डे का जितना भी हम उसको जो दे रहे हैं वेजेस दे रहे हैं, वो उसके जो पर डे का नरेगा में मिलने वाला जो वेजेस है उसको compete कर पा रहा है कि नहीं कर पा रहा है। क्योंकि जब हम कोई भी सेटअप करते हैं तो उसमें वहाँ पे इलेक्ट्रिसिटी का भी हमको खर्च करना पड़ता है, हम कोई रेंटेड जगह भी हमको लेनी पड़ती है अगर हमको अलॉटेड नहीं होती है तो, प्लस उसमें हमें बहुत सारे लॉजिस्टिक भी अदर्स देखने पड़ते हैं, तो वो सारे एक्सपेंसेस भी उसमें काउंट हो जाते हैं। तो वो सारा compete वाला इशू जो रहता है, फिर महिलाएं फिर इसीलिए इंटरेस्ट नहीं लेती है कि हम अपना वो इनकम सोर्स छोड़ के यहाँ पे एंगेज हों। तो ये वाला प्रोसेसिंग में हमारा थोड़ा दिक्कत रहता है। जैसे एक हमारा कस्टर्ड एप्पल वाला प्रोजेक्ट जो है हम लोग राजस्थान में पिछले 3 साल से कर रहे हैं, जिसमें हम लोग पहले मैन्युअली ही हाथ में ग्लव, उसमें हम हाइजीन का ध्यान तो रख ही रहे हैं, ग्लव्स पहन के हम लोग मैन्युअली पल्प का एक्सट्रैक्ट कर रहे थे। लेकिन वही जैसे मैंने बताया कि उसमें टाइम जो है हमारा इन बिटवीन बहुत सारा लग जाता है, और प्लस इन्वॉल्वमेंट भी बहुत ज्यादा हमारा हो जाता है। उसके साथ साथ में अगर हमारा टाइम लगता है तो प्रिजर्वेशन का भी एक बहुत बड़ा इशू है पल्प के साथ में, कस्टर्ड एप्पल के पल्प के साथ में। तो फिर ये सारी इश्यूज देख के जो है हम लोग ने ट्राई किया कि हम अदर एनजीओ, CSR फंड, इस तरह के कन्वर्जेंस के थ्रू हम कुछ फंडिंग करके महिलाओं को इस तरह का मशीनरी हम प्रोवाइड करवा सके, ताकि वो लोग कम टाइम में कम मैन पावर से ज्यादा इनकम जनरेशन एक्टिविटी वो लोग कर पाए। तो इसके लिए पल्प के लिए भी हम महिलाएं जो है अभी एडवांस मशीनरी यूज कर रही हैं। उसके बाद में जो हमारा मिर्च मसाला वाला जो इनिशियली वो लोग मैन्युअली ही करते थे, कुछ एक आध छोटा मशीन था उनके पास में, उसके लिए भी उनके पास कुछ एडवांस मशीन हमने प्रोवाइड करवाई है। उसी के साथ में सैनिटरी नैपकिन का 5 डिस्ट्रिक्ट्स में जो है हम लोग कर रहे हैं, जिसमें पहले वही हमारा जो मैनुअली उन लोग को करना पड़ता था, रॉ मटेरियल था और एक छोटा सा मशीन था जिससे वो सभी महिलाओं को लगना पड़ता था, और पर डे जितना पैड हम एक्सपेक्ट करते थे उतना प्रोडक्शन नहीं हो पाता था। लेकिन 2 डिस्ट्रिक्ट में हमने ऑटोमेटिक मशीन जिसका कॉस्टिंग जो है कुछ 7.5 लाख पड़ता है, उससे हम पर डे 1000 पैड का प्रोडक्शन हम लोग कर रहे हैं। उसमें महिलाओं को इनकम जनरेशन भी वो बहुत अच्छा हो रहा है। उसके साथ में हमको मार्केटिंग का थोड़ा इशू होता है। ये चैलेंजेस हमको होते हैं कि अगर हम प्रोसेसिंग पे भी अगर हम कमांड कर लेते हैं, हम टाइम भी हम बचा लेते हैं, लेकिन मार्केट हम कहाँ देखें, ये हमारा थोड़ा सा एक चैलेंज अभी भी बना हुआ है, जिसपे हम अभी काम कर रहे हैं। और कई सारे प्रोडक्ट्स जो हैं हमने अभी इसके लिए हम फ्लिपकार्ट, अमेजोन, इस पे भी हमने ब्रॉडकास्ट करने का हमारा प्रोसेस स्टार्ट कर दिया है। तो ये चैलेंज हम लोग का रहता है।
Right. Thank you, Mahima ji. I think you did highlight quite a few things, and particularly this marketing of the final produce. बाकी सब हो गया until जब तक marketing नहीं होगा, तो तब तक आमदनी होना शुरू नहीं होगा. And it also ties to the point that the first thing that you said, like the competing opportunities for women, right? And here it's actually 2 programs of the Ministry of Rural Development which are competing against each other. We have Mandeshi on one end and we have the rural livelihood missions on the other end. So how do we ensure that while the initial stages of the business may not be as remunerative, how do women still engage in that business on an ongoing basis? And I think Nidhi did share an interesting example here right at the beginning, that how providing stipends until the business becomes sufficiently viable and is fully up and running, how can those stipends potentially make sure that there is stickiness to this new initiative or the new endeavor that the women are undertaking? So yeah, thank you for sharing that, Mahima ji.
Thank you.
Deepak, maybe final words from you. You have already shared quite a few lessons and reflections from SF's experience already. But anything more that you would like to add in terms of reflections, even from hearing from the other panelists? But in particular, if you have any thoughts on this marketing challenge, like if there are any, again, interesting examples or some thoughts that you may want to share on that.
No, I think Mahima ji has explained quite well, what is a challenge, and we are seeing that. So basically, what we are seeing, as far as another example, that selling a product or selling a equipment is not sufficient, right? End-to-end integration is required. Not just marketing of a product, but also being able to supply them raw material, a right quality, right price raw material to process, right? That is required. And then I think, as Nidhi explained, some support is required in terms of stipend, or you delay the repayments. I think all those things have been discussed, but quite a bit. I think the point here is a good product is required, but a good product standalone is not sufficient. We need to have an ecosystem approach, which means we need to have partners who can look at marketing, who can look at servicing, who can look at financing, and who can look at upskilling, right? And if I do a bit more around upskilling, as one of the things probably that is less discussed, but Adrita mentioned that earlier, upskilling or skilling is not just technical, right? Or not just telling them how to use the products. We have to also build in our training programs, addressing some of the intra-household dynamics and addressing some of the social challenges, right? Because women entrepreneurs have a greater overlap between the personal professional responsibility, right? Which means that quite a significant amount of effort is required, involvement is required with family members and other stakeholders in the society, like panchayat, right? So that women can overcome these social norm constraints and then negotiate space in the household for themselves and economic sphere, right? So we need to focus a bit more on, so let me say like that, quite a lot of gender empowerment programs focuses on women. They focuses on their skilling, they focuses on their training. I think we need to do a bit of a gear change, and we need to also focus on women family members, and we need to do a lot more of sensitization of family members about why to allow them to own asset and work, and not just skilling of women, right? For the impact to be sustainable, for the impact to be deep, right? And for the impact to be scalable, right? That element we cannot miss, in addition to all of the points that we have said, right? Which means a lot of communication is required. That's one. I think the second point quickly is, if we need to, if we're committed for a sustainable and deep impact, right? We need to look at the entire value chain, which means we need to look at supporting women as a customer, user of the product itself, which is a traditional approach, like clean cooking, they use cook stuff. We need to support women as a supplier of energy products, or like a micro entrepreneurs who use productive assets. But we also need to support women as a decision makers and change agents, and those who are developing or those who are incubating or initiating scalable, large scale scalable women entrepreneurs, enterprises. Right. So it's about jobs in the clean energy enterprises. It's about SMEs, women entrepreneurs, and it's also about scalable women-led entrepreneurship, like what we understand as a startup in a way, right? In the current definition, what we understand as startup, we need more women there also. They will drive change. So we need an integrated approach to look at a gender inclusion at all levels in the society, and not just limiting to the jobs or a product for that. So I will stop here, Abhishek.
Well, thanks a lot, Deepak. I think that is well put, and in some ways you're also trying to tie a lot of things together, which we have heard in the discussion so far. So thank you for doing that. I think now it's time for opening this up for Q&A from the audience. So please feel free to shoot in your questions through the Q&A option on your Zoom screens. I would love to take some of your questions and try and respond here as the conversation progresses. And Deepak, I think you did mention a very important point of sensitization, and sensitization beyond the women themselves. We do need to focus on sensitizing family members, other elements of the community which need to come along. And I do want to highlight, I'm not sure how many of us might be aware who are attending the session, CW has been running such an initiative called Women in Sustainability. It's almost a 5-year-long initiative now. And over the years, we have been focusing a lot on how do we sensitize more and more people. And this initiative particularly focuses on how we enhance the women professionals who are in the public policy space, and how do we make the public policy space more inclusive for them, not just in terms of women coming into the sector, but also more women reaching the top tiers in the sector. And sensitization really remains the central theme through various conversations, various dialogues, film screenings, talks. We have been trying to further that agenda here at CW in particular. Yeah, so I guess there are probably not as many questions coming through from the audience. Then what I will do, I'll just quickly try and summarize this fairly rich and diverse discussion that we had today. It's going to be a hard task, but okay, I do see one question popping up there.
So, on behalf of the CW Sustainability, I would like to ask a question. Women play a crucial role in accelerating India's transition to clean energy.
Yeah, I'm just going to read out the question aloud for everyone. The question is that women play a crucial role in accelerating India's transition to clean energy due to their knowledge and local environmental leadership, for example, sustainable resource management or driving sustainable practices within the households and at the community. How should we really leverage this capability that is inherently there with women in the Indian context, especially in order to move forward the sustainability agenda? I'm going to throw it open if anyone of you would like to take that question on. And रेखा जी and महिमा जी, बेसिकली जो क्वेश्चन आया वो ये है कि जो महिलाएं हैं वो स्वभाव से ही सस्टेनेबिलिटी की तरफ काफी रुचि रखती हैं, या उनके डे टू डे जो व्यवहार है उसमें सस्टेनेबिलिटी को फर्दर करने के लिए वो अपने घर में, अपनी कम्युनिटी में ऑलरेडी बहुत सारी ऐसी चीजें करती हैं. तो ये एक जो इनहेरेंट स्ट्रेंथ है, जो एक स्ट्रॉन्ग पॉइंट है इंडियन कल्चर में वुमेन का विद रिगार्ड्स टू सस्टेनेबिलिटी, उसको हम कैसे इस्तेमाल कर सकते हैं ओवरऑल जो मूवमेंट है हमारा सस्टेनेबिलिटी का इस देश में, उसको आगे बढ़ाने के लिए. So if any one of you would like to take this on and reflect. महिमा जी, आप अगर बोल रहे हैं तो आप प्लीज अनम्यूट करिए अपने आप को. या
मैं इस क्वेश्चन पे ये कहना चाहूंगी कि जैसे आपकी बताया, पूछा उन्होंने कि इंडिया में हर महिला कुछ सस्टेनेबिलिटी की तरफ आना चाहती है, इंटरेस्ट है उसका, वो कुछ करना चाहती है. लेकिन हमारे एक्सपीरियंस में भी ऐसा है कि महिलाएं बहुत कुछ करना चाहती हैं, लेकिन उनका जो स्किल है वो कहीं ना कहीं रिफ्लेक्ट नहीं हो पाता. कहीं ना कहीं वो खुद भी अपना स्किल नहीं जान पाती हैं कि मुझ में ये स्किल है या मैं ये कर सकती हूँ. तो थ्रू आवर ऑर्गेनाइजेशन और थ्रू अदर ऑर्गेनाइजेशन जो इस तरह की अप्रोच कर रहे हैं कि महिलाओं में क्या पोटेंशियल है, उनको कहाँ हम आगे लेके जा सकते हैं, तो हम लोग इसमें एक स्किल डेवलपमेंट वाला हम लोग प्रोग्राम करते हैं, जिसमें हम लोग उन्हीं से उनका जो विलिंगनेस है, कौन महिला ये करना चाहती है, उसका क्या इंटरेस्ट है, उसके ऊपर में हम ट्रेनिंग करवाते हैं. लाइक जब इनिशियली हमारा जो प्रोग्राम स्टार्ट होता है, उसी में हम लोग उनको अपॉर्चुनिटी देते हैं कि कहाँ कहाँ उनको इन्वॉल्व होना है ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ देयर एलिजिबिलिटी और देयर एजुकेशन और देयर विलिंगनेस, वो कहाँ कहाँ पहुंच सकती हैं. और इसी तरह से हर प्लेटफॉर्म पे को यूज करके बहुत सारे ऐसे एग्जाम्पल हमारी महिलाओं ने क्रिएट किए हैं कि वो जहां हम घर से वो बाहर नहीं निकल सकती थी, वो अवॉर्डेड बाय आवर रेस्पेक्टेड प्राइम मिनिस्टर, और इस तरह के एग्जाम्पल उन्होंने किए हैं. और प्लस उनको ना केवल अवॉर्डेड है वो लोग, बल्कि उन्होंने एक सस्टेनेबल लाइवलीहुड क्रिएट किया है। उनका जहाँ पे कुछ 1000 से 1500 का मंथली इनकम होता था, वो कुछ 20 से 25,000 मंथली इनकम तक पहुंची हैं थ्रू दिस विलिंगनेस और थ्रू दिस अपॉर्चुनिटीज। तो ये चीज बाहर निकल के आ सकती है। लेकिन कंक्लूजन में मैं यही कहना चाहूंगी कि किसी को भी अपनी रुचि को बाहर लाने के लिए या अपनी रुचि पे के बेसिस पे आगे सस्टेनेबल बनने के लिए उसको कोई ना कोई प्लेटफॉर्म मिलना जरूरी है।
Thank you, Mahima ji. I think Rekha ji,
Abhishek ji,
I'll just translate what Mahima ji said and then I'll come to you. Just give me 10 seconds. No, I think what Mahima ji has highlighted is a very important point, that while women have a lot of that inherent potential, many a times they are not able to discover that potential themselves. And any opportunity which can help, any platform that can help really bring that potential to forefront and support them a little bit, they can really take this momentum forward. रेखा जी, या ओवर टू यू।
मैं भी यही कंटिन्यू, सस्टेनेबिलिटी की बात आती है ना, तो महिलाओं के लिए बहुत सारे जो हमारे ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में हमने किया है, हर वीकली एक महिला की स्टोरी आती है न्यूज़पेपर में, और हमारा कम्युनिटी रेडियो सेंटर है। तो जो महिलाएं हैं जो ऑलरेडी सस्टेनेबल थोड़ी हो गई है, तो उसकी वो आके रेडियो पे उसकी स्टोरी बताती है। और हम कैसे बोल सकते हैं कि ये कैसे सस्टेनेबल हो गई है, कैसा, जैसे महिमा जी ने बताया कि 1-2 हजार पहले वो कमाती थी, अभी वो 20-25 हजार रुपए कमा रही है। हमने ये भी देखा है कि पहले वो घर में क्या खाने में क्या खाते थे, पहले रोटी और सिर्फ एक सब्जी खाते थे, अभी उसमें और चावल आ गया है, दाल आ गया है, कुछ अलग अलग चीजें, दूध आया है, दही आया है। और उसके बच्चे जो है पहले यहीं पे लोकल पढ़ते थे, अभी इंजीनियरिंग कर रहे हैं, अलग अलग टेक्नोलॉजी में गए हैं। ये अलग अलग चीजें हैं जो सस्टेनेबली उस महिलाओं की दिखाते हैं। इनकम तो सोर्स एक है ही, लेकिन उसमें घर में भी वो लीडरशिप ले रही है। और बहुत सारे जगह पे हमने देखा है अभी कि पहले महिलाओं के नाम पे प्रॉपर्टी बहुत ही कम थी, लेकिन अभी वो महिलाओं के नाम पे प्रॉपर्टी भी आ गई है, घर आ गया है, जमीन आ गया है। और हमने ये भी देखा है जिस घर के महिलाओं के नाम पे प्रॉपर्टी, वहां का उसका टैक्स भी रेगुलरली जा रहा है गवर्नमेंट को। तो ऐसे बहुत सारी चीजें हैं कि जो महिलाओं का सस्टेनेबल ये करती है, काउंट करती है। यही मुझे सिर्फ यहाँ
Right. Thank you, Rekha ji. I think you have already given a few ideas in terms of what could those platforms be, where just sharing inspirational stories of other women with the woman itself can lead to many more women moving forward in that direction. There is one other question that we have received from the audience, which is also somewhat related to platform. The question is that there are already a number of organizations within India and across the world which are trying to further women empowerment in different ways and forms. Is there a common platform where the learnings from all these different initiatives can be shared? Yeah, I'm not aware of any such platform, but if any one of us has come across something, might be worth sharing here. But I do think that this is certainly pointing to an important need, that how do we bring a lot of these lessons and learnings across different contexts into a common place. And I think the effort of today's session was also in some way in that direction, that how do we bring these different learnings together from various initiatives, various organizations have been working on this front for a while. But certainly I think we can take heed of this question and potentially see if something can be created as a more formal platform to become a sort of go-to resource for sharing these things. But if you'd like to add anything to this, please feel free to, anyone. Okay.
No, I think you're right, Abhishek. Completely agree with you.
All right, great. I must first thank you all, especially our audience as well as all the panelists for joining us here today. Very, very enriching discussion. I think we really went into a lot of nuances, a lot of specifics, which I'm sure are going to be helpful for anyone who is trying to even remotely look at this issue. And I do hope that this session is also changing some perspectives, where instead of looking at this as an afterthought, we are starting with this thought of how we ensure that gender inclusion remains central to whatever we are trying to do, including energy transition, including increasing livelihood opportunities across the board. With that, maybe I just take a minute or two to at least highlight some of the very pertinent points that I heard. Of course, there was a lot in this discussion which I cannot encapsulate in a minute or two. But certainly the need for an ecosystem approach where you're not just focusing on technology, but you're focusing on financing, you're focusing on upskilling, you're focusing on market linkages, you're focusing on upskilling, not just on the technical front, but also on the business and financial literacy and digital literacy front. I think those are clearly coming out as one important stream of emerging insights. And second, I think in general, making sure that you are listening to your user, you're listening to your customer, you're listening to your woman out there on the field is very, very important, right from Nidhi's remark at the beginning till the final inputs in terms of sharing the stories, success stories of women among themselves. I think that has been one common theme, that how do you ensure that if there is a technology, it is designed in consultation with their users, including women. If there is a financial product, it is keeping in mind the day-to-day activities of the woman, so that it is not as arduous for them to actually go to a bank and get the loan, but it sort of fits into their seamless workday. If it is about upskilling, the skilling itself is appreciative of not just the technical and the business side, but also the cultural challenges that the women have to face, be it the intra-household dynamic or be it the perception of financiers in terms of how they unlock loan, whether it is unmarried women or whether it is women who are who need to have actually a co-borrower in terms of their partner, etc., when they're trying to get this loan. So that nuanced understanding of how the reality hits really the ground is very important as we think through and solve for these solutions. So once again, thank you all. Thank you everyone who joined us for this session. Really, really enriching conversation. And we hope we can take some of these lessons and start changing things on the ground from here on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.